Go ahead and raise your hand for those of you who think that they grew up in a household that did conflict well. Go ahead, look around. In my experience, about 95% of those in the room did not experience healthy conflict in their home. Conflict is one of those things that we all know is a part of life, and yet we're surprised and hurt when it happens. So the question is not if it comes, but when it comes. So are you ready? Is your group ready? We've talked quite a bit during this series of videos about loving one another, and yet one of the things that gets in the way of loving one another can be conflict. How would you finish this sentence? A conflict is a blessing if. You may be thinking right now, if you don't destroy the relationship, or if you learn from it, or if you feel heard. All these are great answers. But remember, John 13 still bears its weight here as it relates to conflict. When Jesus is talking here, he's giving us a command, an imperative in the Greek. And a command can be obeyed, it can also be disobeyed. And this passage and others have to inform how we enter into conflict. In my family of origin, my wife and I grew up in very different homes where conflict was handled very differently. In my home, we dealt with things directly, where you had to be the loudest to be heard, while my wife's family felt that conflict was never healthy and it was to be avoided at all costs. Neither of these were helpful. Obviously, this was something that my wife and I had to deal with as we formed our own family. And in the same way, you have been formed by your upbringing, experiences, your temperament, and all those things play into how you handle conflict. So conflict can be a blessing. It can be. And when the conflict comes, is actually the opportunity for deeper spiritual growth and relational intimacy. Most have the tendency to withdraw during these times, and when they do, they rob themselves and others of growth and maturity. Our hope and prayer is that your group would be a group who's able to work through the conflict, allowing members to push on each other, because when you do, growth tends to occur. There are a few things that we need to keep in mind when dealing with conflict. First, and this is super important, have regret. This is not how it should be. One thing that we can all agree on is that we don't like to be in conflict with one another. We know that there will be a day, one day, where there will be no relational breakdown. So let's yearn for that day. And as best as we can, let's allow that eternal mindset to affect how we enter into this conflict right now. Second, this conflict will not undo us. This is more of a statement than anything, but making a statement in your heart right now before the conflict comes, that this conflict will not undo us. There is something here that roots us far beyond our human strength, because the blood of Jesus is what draws us together. In a culture that says you do you can say no. You can say that I'm going to be for others and I'm going to step into forgiveness. Because when we forgive, we break off the grip of the enemy and we're able to live in freedom. Third, be a good listener first, then speak in love. Ephesians 4:15 says, speak the truth in love. Bad listeners, by definition, are selfish listeners. So be humble. When you listen, earn the right to be heard. If you can't repeat back to them what they're saying, then you haven't earned the right to be heard. Paul Tripp's really helpful here. He says, both truth and love matter. Whenever I'm willing to speak hatefully to you, I step outside of God's way of communicating and destroy unity rather than build it. And whenever I'm willing to compromise honesty, I try to fool you into thinking that we're unified. I can create an illusion of unity that will soon blow up in our faces. Paul Tripp was helpful when he says, both truth and love matter. Whenever I'm willing to speak hatefully to you, I step outside of God's way of communicating and destroy unity rather than build it. And whenever I'm willing to compromise honesty and I try to fool you into thinking that we're unified, I create an illusion of unity that will soon blow up in our faces. Ephesians 2:14 says, for he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one, has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. So who is your peace? Jesus. Not the person you're in conflict with. See, we have a tendency to build up the wall of hostility that Christ died to tear down. So speak the truth in love. Fourth, desire to solve the problem rather than win. Integrated people don't fight to be right. They fight for what is right. And there's a world of difference between those two statements. So heart level question, are you the type of person that has to be right? And if so, you will struggle to reconcile with others. The person you are in conflict with is not your enemy, so don't treat them as one. Desire to solve the problem rather than win. And lastly, this may be one of the most important things in conflict. As far as it depends on you, live at peace. We know that at times reconciliation and forgiveness mean two different things for different people. You cannot force someone to reconcile, nor in certain instances is it safe to do so. There are relationships that, for the safety of a person, it's better to forgive and break off the relationship. And now you never do that alone or quickly. You always involve others who have your best interest at heart. One day, you and I will stand in front of the Lord and give an account for how we have treated one another in conflict, what you did and what you said. And as we said earlier, this eternal perspective matters for how we interact with others in conflict. If there's one thing I can say to you to encourage you right now, it's this. Learn to have the hard conversation now so that you don't have to have a costly conversation later. It is always better to keep a short account than to allow bitterness and anger to fester between you and another saint.